I did have a decent ear, and once people kind of told me, kind of defined for me what aural skills were, then I was like, oh well, that's easy. That's a fourth. That's a minor third. That's a major chord. This progression is 1 5 6 4, or this progression is 1 flat 7 flat 6 5, and that part came pretty easily to me. And then as a kid, I wasn't. This is going to sound weird to say, but I was my favorite activities were ones where I was just kind of by myself. So I actually kind of enjoyed practicing, and I got to a point where I enjoyed the tedium of like shaving away and getting a little bit better at something. Like I played a lot with Legos when I was a kid, and I was fine just being in the basement, putting something together for like 5 hours and figuring out the way that I wanted to do it. And then when I found out, or when I started doing that with music, those two kind of pieces of my brain came together, and I enjoyed getting better at an instrument. Eventually, I did have to train my fingers to do what my ears could hear, and that did take a little bit of time. But I did at least have the technique. I knew scales and arpeggios, and I knew how to play chords on the piano. It was just getting them under my fingers that took a little while. Well, I knew I was decent at music, and part of it was kind of lack of planning. I didn't really have any great goal of what I wanted to do, but I was pretty good at horn, and the university was in my backyard. And I knew I didn't want to do education, not because like I thought I'd be bad at teaching or anything like that, but I know there's a lot of other things that come with teaching that have nothing to do with teaching, and I didn't really want to do anything like that, like parents and things like that. Um, so I decided just to do performance, and I really didn't know what opportunities there even were for horn performance. I was interested in jazz and pop as well. I was just thinking like, yeah, I can do something with this, but I wasn't really sure what yet. And I really didn't even have that big of an idea of it until I went to grad school. And then I had a much more kind of focused conversation with the horn teacher at ASU, Dr. John Erickson. And I remember he sat me down in the first lesson and said something like, so what are your goals? And in the back of my head, I just said out loud, like, oh, I think I'll do, I think it'd be fun to be a freelance player. And I mean, little did I know that's pretty much everyone is a freelance player at some point. That's like the first step to like becoming a full-time something in performance, is like you're inevitably probably going to be a freelance player forever. And then, well, not forever, but at some point. And then I think I said forever as a Freudian slip, because now in the year 2021, even if you're a taxi driver, you're a freelance person. Like everything is independent contracting now, and everyone's self-employed, and everyone's on the gig economy. So, there's lesson number one: get used to the freelance economy. It's going to happen. I got one for both, and there's always more money to be had in piano scholarships than horn. That's just the nature of the beast. My sister-in-law, as well as one of my roommates in grad school, they worked in the box office of the Kansas City Symphony at one point, and they kept saying like, we'd love to get these soloists on other instruments in here, but what fills the seats are violin solos, violin guest artists, and piano guest artists. And that's I think that kind of comes through to academia as well. That's where the money is. So I did have scholarship money for piano in undergrad, and my first year, that basically meant that I had to take lessons and I had to accompany people, but I didn't really make it known that I was a piano player, which kind of bit me in the butt, because what happened is by the end of each semester, some of the students would find out, oh, Adam has a scholarship, he has to do this. And the lazier people who take music lessons would come to me a week before juries and say, I need an accompanist. And I'd have to do it. I wouldn't have any choice. So when I got to grad school, I pretty much didn't tell anyone I played piano, because I was afraid of that same thing happening. But I did have some chops. I basically had a really good ear, and I could plunk out like a melody. So that's kind of where the piano stuff came in. I did play it, and I did find myself like playing some pop stuff in the practice room, and I didn't think there was a serious musician in the next practice room to overhear me. But did a lot of that piano stuff in undergrad and grad school as well, just for my own interest, really. But once I graduated, I had kind of nothing going on, and I had like $6,000 in the bank, and I was able to stretch that for 6 months. I was really proud of myself for doing that. Like nowadays, no way, that wouldn't last me 6 weeks nowadays. But hashtag married life. I tried again for that piano bar thing and spent like 3 hours a day. I was getting better at horn and stuff, and I was doing auditions and all of that. But I do remember even our horn teacher at ASU said, like, on average, you do 25 professional orchestra auditions before you even pass the first round. And when you don't want to do auditions you're not prepared for, so you're like preparing a whole bunch for a lot of auditions, but you don't want to just do auditions for the sake of doing them. And honestly, doing 25 auditions would take me 3 to 5 years. And once I figured that out, I was like, I guess a job is in the cards for me. I got to find some other way of paying bills and stuff. And so that's when I was like, I've got this 6-month window where I can get these songs under my fingers and maybe get a job at a piano bar or something. And it did eventually work out at a different club. The club I tried out for at first just had no room for noobs, but they were open. But another company was opening one on the other side of the valley, about a half-hour, 45-minute drive away. And yeah, they were fine with paying me peanuts to come and play and yell at me and tell me what I was doing wrong and get better. And I kind of thought, if I'll do this piano thing, I'll take 6 months off of auditioning until this piano thing becomes second nature. Because a lot of it was also audience participation stuff that I was not taught in school at all, and had to kind of it was trial by fire for a long time, and a lot of really embarrassing failing on stage. And I thought in 6 months, when this is more second nature, I'll get back to doing horn auditions. And it took a lot longer than 6 months for it to become second nature, really, to do the piano gig. And eventually horn wasn't just on the back burner. Horn became something I haven't touched for 10 years. Like, there's two pianos facing each other. I'll play a song and then the other person plays a song, and it goes back and forth. People write down requests and bring them up, and that method has already changed a whole bunch. Now I have used to be paper request slips. Now I have this kind of thing with like a QR code for my song list and Venmo, so I can just look at my phone and see what people want. And that also helps with the social distancing in some places, because I'm playing in a lot of states that do have mask mandates and don't have mask mandates. And I'm just like, hey, you can sit over there 600 feet away. That's fine. You can still request stuff. But how it works is, we get requests, and then I'll sing that request, and then this person will sing a request, and it'll go back and forth. And we try to make it interactive. So we try to find reasons for people to clap or dance or sing along, or even get people on stage to do like a silly bit. A handful of those bits are PG. Most of them are a little less PG. The best way that I heard it put, which kind of put me in my place for a second, was I was on an audition committee for the Mesa Symphony Orchestra, which I think is now Symphony of the Southwest. And I showed up to be on that audition committee, and the conductor was there. And this was about 6 months into me dueling. And the conductor asked me, "So how was serenading the Soust?" And that's kind of what it is. You do your best to make money for the bar and stuff like that. But at this point, I did mostly piano clubs for about 6 or 7 years, but I've been doing only private events for a while, and then filling in my schedule with club gigs. So now I go to fundraisers, and I do the same thing where I say something like, "Well, we've got $10 for Piano Man, but that's a pretty popular song, and we're trying to raise money for you guys. So I'm going to play that song $50 from now." And then we up the price for songs and keep playing songs for about 3 hours. And then we try to raise as much money as we can for the local firefighters. Or I've done a fundraiser for the prom committee of this local town, or like cancer awareness, or what have you. So it'll be corporate parties, wedding receptions. Sometimes I'll even play at colleges. I'm doing a Ghouling Pianos show at Indiana University this Friday, where I'll stack some pumpkins and some fake cobwebs on the pianos, and then I'll use those song list things right there, and I'll go back. I'll play some Dua Lipa. Person across from me will play Fancy Like, and then I'll play Mr. Brightside by the Killers. and go back and forth like that, and just try to get them to sing along, which isn't too difficult with a song as popular as Mr. Brightside. But that's basically what it is. Just trying to get the energy going and try to play some live music in front of people, and try to get them to interact and make that connection. The concept, or the way that I kind of go about it, because some people will use like drum machines and backing tracks along with it. I try to just use piano and my voice, because I like that idea of that even the 500 strangers who are in a bar, we're really just at someone's private party, and there happened to be a piano in the corner, and one guy knew a few songs and got the whole room singing. Like, that's the kind of vibe that I try to go for. I don't want to go up there like in a big fancy tuxedo and pretend that I'm better than the audience, or the audience is better than me and I should just be ignored. Like, we're all just there to have a communal, good campfire. The gigs that I had were on weekends, and if I wanted to work in horn, if I wanted to audition, if I wanted orchestra gigs, I would have to take the weekends off. And not only would I have to take the weekend off, I'd have to take the entire week off, because oftentimes rehearsals are like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then Saturday you have a dress rehearsal and a concert. So it'd be the entire week. And I would make more money on a Saturday night than I would the entire week, unless I was playing in CSO or, you know, Boston or Cincinnati or something. And that seemed a little bit too high of ambitions for me to meet, having not played my horn as frequently as I did when I was in school. So it was a little bit of that. There was a sad realization. Like, one day I'm like, I kind of like what I'm doing, but I'm never going to get to play Mahler again. This kind of stinks. But I also, for the most part, I do enjoy what I'm doing when I don't have to play Don't Stop Believing for the 5th time that night. But I do enjoy what I'm doing. And it did come down to that whole scheduling thing. Like, eventually there wasn't any time to even play horn. I did an audition at this club that was in Tempe, Arizona, where ASU is. I auditioned at that club, and I could play a couple of songs, but I could mostly just play Ben Folds songs. I was a big fan of Ben Folds. He doesn't get requested much, so they were like, well, you can play these songs that you know, but it's not going to do us any good on stage. You're useless to us as is. And they gave me a list of like 20 songs I had to learn. That was like I said, Don't Stop Believing, Only the Good Die Young, I Saw Her Standing There, stuff like that. It was like 20 songs long. And there was even stuff like Margaritaville. Like, do I have to learn Margaritaville? Okay, fine. I'll learn how to play schmaltzy country songs on piano as well. But you figure it out. You eat a big piece of humble pie. No gig is below you until you're so busy that you have to say no to gigs, because there's just scheduling conflicts. But when you start out, like, no gig is below you. And even getting back to Ben Folds, he was in a polka band when he started. And like, I think he even tells a story about getting mugged while wearing lederhosen and walking back home. Like, that, it happens. You do the silly gigs, and yeah, you do the silly gigs to meet the people, to make the connections. And eventually nowadays, like, that's how I get more gigs, is from other piano players. They know me, they've played with me, and they say, we have an opening at this club, you want to come? Okay, cool. I learn them all by ear. If there's like a more exact opening of something, then or a solo, I would usually transcribe that note for note, just because it's hard to remember exactly what it is when there's that many notes. So I did learn stuff by ear, but I did transcribe, for example, like the specific piano parts of like Carry On My Wayward Son, or more intricate kind of piano things like that. The Way It Is by Bruce Hornsby, I figured those out. But yeah, it was all by ear. And every once in a while, I'll actually play along with the recording, because I'm also kind of a speed demon. I got to get them at the right tempo and stuff. But yeah, all by ear, a little bit of sheet music if something was really complex, but I'd usually try to transcribe it first and then compare what I had to what the sheet music supposedly said it was. If I've heard it enough and I think I can do it about 75%, I'll go for it. But if not, then I try not to. And you try to think of funny ways to do it. You toss it to your partner, see if they know it, or you say something like, hey, this is a great song, but if I try to play it, I'm not going to do it justice, and I'm not going to take your tip if I can't do it. So, you know, if you got $5 store credit, or however much they gave for it, or if it's if it's a college gig where we're not getting tipped, then what request? I didn't see that. But I have found out it is kind of treacherous to try and fake songs. Most songs nowadays are pretty easy to fake, but I do have to, the hard part is fitting the lyrics to the hands. And oftentimes, I'm pretty good at reading horn music because there's only one note at a time. Reading piano music is much harder for me. So I usually, if I'm faking a song, I'll just look up lyrics. And if I don't know how the lyrics fit with the music, and I'll usually figure this out while the other player is playing something. I'll be looking at the phone and trying to kind of mouthing the lyrics to myself. And if I can't figure out how it fits with my hands, that's when I'll bail and I won't do it. If I think I can figure it out, I'll say, well, everyone, this is my first time. Here we go. I hope you weren't counting on hearing the bridge because that ain't happening, but here's a couple verses and a chorus. I grew up in the Midwest, so, the Phoenix weather really wasn't doing it for me, and it doesn't do it for anyone in the summer. It's awful. So I moved back to the Midwest and I played that's when I actually first started in a company that mostly does private gigs, because they just, there are a lot of dueling piano companies out there that started with a website. They didn't start in a club or something. They just made a website and we're really good with SEO, search engine optimization. And they just advertised like, yes, we can play your wedding. We can play your private event. So within 2 years, I was kind of doing that with a different company in Wisconsin. And they were mostly just in Wisconsin. And they had their trailer full of gear. They had their like Chevy Excursion, a gigantic SUV kind of thing. And they would fill that up with the 2 piano players and a sound guy. And then we'd roll into wherever the gig was, load it up, play the gig, load it out, drive back home, go to bed at 4 a.m. every Saturday night. But then when I moved to Chicago, I started more into the clubs because there's lots of clubs in Chicago. But I got in, the current company that I work for is called Midwest Dueling Pianos. And that's another one that they start a website and they start advertising that you can play these things kind of all over the Midwest, except this company was started by people who were playing in clubs all over Michigan for like 15 years and then started this company. But his model, my agent's model, is basically like he has 2 players out of Kansas City. He's got a player who lives in Minneapolis. He's got me in Chicago, and he's got a few others that he'll call if he needs them in Chicago. He's got a player in Pittsburgh. He's got a player in Indianapolis, and basically he sells the gigs kind of wherever he can. And then I guess he has to sit down and figure out where the geography works, which means, yes, I'm usually in Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa. I meet up with that player in Minneapolis and Iowa a lot. So I just drive alone there, and which can be tough. It's a lot of hours on the road, but I started learning Spanish. That was cool. You find some books on tape, you find other things to keep you occupied, but I'll drive to Iowa. I'll meet this guy. This right here, not a real piano. It's hollow. This is a keyboard. So I fit 2 of these, 4 speakers, some light stands, speaker stands, all the cords. That all fits in a Dodge Grand Caravan. So here's one thing you can look forward to is buying a minivan before you even have kids. So your cool credibility just goes down the tubes immediately until you're on stage. Then you're cool, and then they see your car and they're like, no. But that's basically how I got into that. I started subbing for Midwest Dueling Pianos. They had private gigs that were in the Chicago area, and at the time they had kind of a flaky player. But there was another player in Chicago that I knew really well who would then call me and say like, hey, that player flaked out again. Can you do this gig? And then I'd be like, sure, yeah, I'll get a sub for this club gig, and I'll come and do that gig with you because that guy wanted to play with me. And I was like, yes, that's great. Okay, I'm making friends. I'm showing that I can play well and that I am willing to do this kind of thing. And maybe the club owner wasn't happy, but they never noticed. But I did a few I subbed and did a few gigs with this other player from Midwest Dueling Pianos. And then after a couple months of doing like 3 or 4 gigs like that, the agent called me and said, what do you think about coming on full time? This is what it involves. You're probably on the road every Friday and Saturday, but I can offer you X amount, which is a lot more than what you're getting here. And I was like, I don't have kids yet. Sure, let's do that. And I've been doing that for 7 years now. I have played most of the clubs here in Chicago And so all the players know me, all the club owners know me. And if someone gets sick or doesn't want to do the gig, then I'll get a call and I'll say like, okay, yeah, it's a Thursday night. I got nothing going on tonight. Yeah, I can do it. So there's, it is mostly like, I've gotten to a lucky point where I do have someone who gets me a full-time schedule and a full-time pay, but I can still fill in some of the gaps with some of that freelance stuff. Diversifying is a good idea, as I found out during the pandemic when there were suddenly no gigs. And it's good to have some other ways of making money. Like I do teach a little bit as well, and I found a way to teach online, as did my wife, who is a violin player. Yeah, so we were both kind of like, what do we do now once that pandemic hit? And then a month and a half into it, when it became obvious that this was going to last a long time, we were like, what do we really do right now? But I got into the drill writing because that was another interest that I had. I marched drum corps back in the day, and so I had kind of the knowledge of it, and I knew the software because anyone, I don't know if all performance majors have to do this, but I did do, I didn't take a class in marching band. I didn't take the marching band kind of studies class because I think that was for ed majors, but I already kind of knew the software, and I was curious about it because of course the school had it for free, so I could still mess around with it and figure it out. But eventually I wanted to get back into that about 8-10 years ago, and I didn't have the software, but I decided, here's the other thing about being a performer is learn some stuff about advertising yourself, and learn some video editing, some image editing, so that you can, make your own sort of advertisements, websites, Instagram stories and posts and posters for advertising your shows and stuff like that. So what I did was, like, I made a letter saying that I can write drill, and I made 100 copies of that, and I sent it out to every band in Chicago, and I got one reply. But that one gig was enough to be like, okay, now I can afford this really expensive software. And so I went out and bought the software. So it was basically an even kind of thing. I didn't really make any money, but I didn't lose any money. But I had the software now. And then eventually I got in touch with some other friends that I marched with who have their own company, where they go to a marching band director and they say, hey, give us X amount of money and we will give you a custom music arrangement for your band. And we will give you custom drill, which is the pictures they make on the field. And we will also give you custom guard choreography. And so that's mostly the drill writing that I do now, is for that company that's run by a couple of friends that I marched with. But I wanted to do that because it was fun. But also it's a little bit of diversification. And I also wanted to, I hope, like right now my income is like 90% dueling and 10% drill writing. I don't think that's going to be reversed, but I would like it to get more, like, once I turn 50 or 55 or so, I'd still like to be dueling, but I don't want to be the person in the club who has to learn the song that just came out last week. I don't want to have to rely on that when I'm 55, not only because, mostly because, yeah, the 25-year-olds who are in the club are going to look at my old butt and say, what is he doing playing this song? This, I don't want to hear this guy play this song anymore, So I'll be doing the private stuff and I won't rely on the club stuff, but I'd like that income to be a little bigger on one end and smaller on the other in about 15 years. So it's really kind of looking down the road and realizing that, the gig that I'm doing right now might have an expiration date. I haven't written a song for a while. And that's another thing that I've been trying to do for a while, is finally get that stuff like professionally recorded. And that's kind of a goal of mine right now, especially now that I've started streaming online. Like, I've started to do about 2 or 3 streams a week, and I see everyone else who's doing it has that like, it's a great way of just advertising your own music. And I feel like finally I have a good way to advertise that kind of stuff. So I want to get that stuff recorded, but that is for now just kind of a creative outlet. That's not making me too much, and Spotify will take most of the money that I make doing it anyhow. So that is just kind of a creative outlet, but it is nice to sit down and do something for yourself on the piano. And that's one thing I tried to tell myself, even when playing horn, was like, every once in a while, like, yes, it does get tedious and monotonous to practice all of this stuff. But play something for yourself every once in a while. That's a good idea. Don't hesitate to start performing. I don't know what, and I was playing in some symphonies while I was in grad school, but even in undergrad, I was like, well, this is the time when I need to be in a practice room. Nah, get on stage, start making those connections as soon as you can. Start performing, and especially like I was trying to do jazz stuff on horn. One of the realizations of jazz is that you learn jazz on stage. You can learn a lot in academia about jazz, but you're going to learn a lot more of it failing on stage for 6 months, and learning from other musicians and making those connections. But start making those performance connections as soon as you can. And then that other thing that I think I might have said earlier, like no gig is below you. Like if there's a gig, if someone's willing to pay you to do something, it doesn't matter if it's the worst music you've ever played. Take the gig, make the connections, show up on time, have a smile, show up prepared, and make sure they know your name, make sure they have your contact information, and you're probably going to hear from them down the road for something that's a little more interesting.
Thank you, Adam, for joining us today.
Of course, my pleasure. I had a lot of fun.